Thank you so much for waiting with us. I think it's now a good time to start our event dedicated to women and to the future of leadership. My name is 𝗞𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. I will be your facilitator today. I am part of the 𝗞𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Academy, and it's an honor and a joy to be here with all of you today. Before we go into the topic, there are some housekeeping rules that I would like to share with you. So please follow the chat. Any important information will be shared with you in the chat. And also please use the chat for your reactions, your comments, your reflections. We should have interesting conversation today. So really anything you want to contribute to it, please do it in the chat. It is also, for me, really nice to say that this event is a joint event organized by 𝗞𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 and by the IFRC 𝗞𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Academy. We are very happy to do this event on the occasion of the International Women's Day. We thought that it's really nice, not only to widen the audiences, but also to widen the conversations. Why so? Well, because 𝗞𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 has in its mission an ambition to really see more women in positions of power, in leadership positions in the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, while we at the 𝗞𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Academy are interested in igniting conversations, in bringing new perspectives and approaches to leadership, and looking for these new ways of leading that the world requires us today. And I think it's really important because it's not anymore enough to just react and adapt and maybe anticipate and adapt again. I think we as leaders today, we have to have much more intentional agenda for building a better world, to building really a much more inclusive world, a world where we are much kinder to each other and to the planet where we live in. And the International Women's Day is a perfect opportunity for that, because it's a day that calls for solidarity and change. And here we talk about structural change, we talk about systemic change, about sustainable and visionary change. And I think that this change really requires a different kind of leadership. And what is this leadership? This is what we will try to unpack here today with all of you. So let's start with a lens towards our speakers. I will introduce each of them, and I will ask in the beginning one question just for all of us to know our speakers a little bit better. So let me start with Jennifer Brown. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us from Australia. I know it's a late evening for you, so we really appreciate your time and your dedication to this cause. Jennifer has been with the Australian Red Cross leading the First Nations centrality and has been in leadership positions for more than 30 years, from human rights to international relations to social policies to equality. With her living experience as an Aboriginal person, Jennifer has been really pushing forward agenda for inclusive organization in the Australian Red Cross, and has been pivotal and very important in building the inclusive culture in the Australian Red Cross. Jenny, welcome here today. My first question to you is, throughout this 30 years of your leadership, I'm sure that there were some aha moments that were very important to you, that really opened your eyes. Could you share one of those moments with us today?
Yes, and thank you, and thank you for having me here today as well, although it's nighttime here in Australia. But yes, we do have many aha moments. One for me, which stands out, I think, is really resetting my leadership style to be one of, really humility, authentic and courageous as well, and being curious, open to being challenged. And it's probably a bit more like being people-minded as well. So I used to react really, really quickly, but I learned to pause and reflect before I did act as well. So this change, I think, for me has really come through my passion, because for the past 9 years here in Australian Red Cross and here in Australia, I've been advancing reconciliation between this country's First Nations people, which is my people, with other Australians and those who are new to this country as well. So as an organisational tool, our organisations, we often have a plan, we have actions, we have deliverables, accountabilities and timeframes. But through a leadership program, I wanted to find my voice to make reconciliation feel real. And it was more than just a plan, so that everyone could realise that they themselves have potential to contribute to reconciliation and to connect with others along the way. But my aha moment came to me during a speech when I realised that this was a legacy that was handed down from my father, who as a local elder in his community believed in the goodness of people, and he brought people together to learn more about First Nations history and culture. So from a standpoint theory, my own personal experience, I opened myself up to challenges so that I could see different perspectives. I collaborated to ensure the voice of First Nations was heard and included, and I changed the narrative, such as power structures, strength-based approaches, and shifting mindsets. There is a saying I do like to use as well, which is you need to unlearn to relearn. And I apply this principle because I consider myself to be a lifelong learner. This also led to transformation as, you know, addressing First Nations humanitarian challenges. With here in Australian Red Cross, we have a philosophy of First Nations centrality, which is embedded in our strategy, and it's a strength of our organisation where First Nations perspectives influence cultural knowledge and in practice inform our way of doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm happy because we will be able to go into the in depth of some of these things that you mentioned just now. Welcome to the conversation. Our second speaker today is Kristiina Kumpula. So happy to have you, Kristiina, with us. Kristiina has been leading the Finnish Red Cross for many years. She just stepped down from the position of Secretary General. She still leads the IFRC Mediation and Compliance Committees. She is a chair there. Incredible experience, Kristiina. Really so happy to have you here with us today. My question to you is maybe a little bit lighter before we go into this very difficult topics is, you know, I think even Kristiina had this face palm moments where you realize and you have your eyes rolling, oh my God, like how did I not realize that? Could you share one of these funny maybe episodes of such a accident in your leadership journey?
Thank you, 𝗞𝗿𝗀𝗺𝗫, and thank you for having me here. It's really exciting to have this discussion. I must say there are many issues, but one thing which has somehow followed me through my leadership career was when I was first time in my leadership senior management team of my National Society. I had been working with the National Society for a long time, and of course being some kind of an object of the decisions of the senior management team and more or less critically apply them if it's not, I mean, when it was necessary. And then suddenly I was a part of that team. And of course, my experience and my thinking, my assumption was like a senior management team is something where the strategic thinking is happening. The people are really focusing on what is the right thing to do, what is the future of the National Society. And suddenly I was in a, I would say, not being too critical, in a closed group where was no real agenda. Everybody was telling what they are doing. And it's nothing we could today call team, like a sharing experience or putting my own ideas and thinking and a critical scrutiny, like other people saying, like, why do you think so? And is it really fitting on the whole National Society or our interest and our future? And this is something what has followed me during my career, because of course my interest has been and is, and I very much follow other thinking, like how to avoid the top to down, how to really look at as we are doing now. What is your experience? How would you do this? What is your critical thinking on this, and how to work together and how to trust each other in order to be better? And this is really like, it has followed me in the last 30 years, like, oh, how to do this and how to ask 𝗞𝗺𝗺, how to ask everybody how to do. And this is really one of the big moments of my own thinking what is leadership.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm happy we'll hear more about that in a bit. And our third speaker is Grace Waswa. She's joining us from Kenya. Grace is a member of the Kenyan Red Cross. She has been leading and is interested in questions linked to sustainability, socioeconomic policies, and youth policies. Grace was also one of the winners of the Solferino Academy, IFRC Solferino Academy Limitless Academy, one of the change makers and innovators, really pushing forward in our network with the innovation strategy and forward thinking as well. So Grace, is a pleasure to have you here as well. And you know, I read somewhere the research that if we believe something lucky, for example, wearing a lucky t-shirt, it actually makes us perform better. So I want to ask you, do you have your favorite mantra, ritual, saying that actually also guides you and supports you in your leadership journey?
All right, thank you so much, 𝗞𝗺𝗺. Really happy to be here. And yes, I do have something that I wouldn't call it a mantra, but something that I believe as a young leader I need to follow, and that is to always see people, always ask people, always listen to people, and always understand people. And I think when I was building Vijana Tupo, just before we got into Solferino Academy, the Limitless program, one of the things that we were trying to solve was youth unemployment. And my perception at that time was that youth unemployment is caused by the lack of skills, proper skills, which is true. But that was not the only reason why young people were facing a lot of unemployment in my region. So as we were innovating through the innovation process, we were able to take a step back and actually see these young people from their perspective, listen to them, understand them, and not just look at a wicked problem, look at a societal problem from what I see at the surface level, but to keep asking questions so that to come up with a product that really serves them, a product that really meets their needs. So always for me, a key thing for me is always see people, ask people, listen to people, and understand people. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. I think it's a great start. And maybe, you know, I was not very polite in the beginning, so I will excuse myself now because I didn't mention that our event is also streamlined on YouTube. So we are also welcome everyone who is watching us on YouTube, and we are very happy to see and have so many participants joining here today. Okay, so moving now into these questions of leadership. You know, I would like to give a little frame why we think the discussion is important. Just last year, we at the Solferino Academy have conducted a research on the future of humanitarian leadership. We have interviewed senior leaders across the network, trying to figure out if we could come up to some sort of collective frame or collective guidelines that could really help us as leaders of the IFRC network to go forward and to agree that these are the leadership qualities that we all find very important and we need to strengthen them. And there are many things that came out in this report. Leaders talked about the need for a new mindset, that we need leadership that is continuously open to learning. We talked about this mindset of innovation, that we have to really, as leaders, be stepping up and building the spaces where we encourage people to experiment, to innovate, to try new solutions. Another thing also that came was that we really need to prioritize the well-being of our teams, but also take care of ourselves, also prioritize our well-being. And this element of self-reflection, not only in why I do things and how I do them, but also that as a leader, I have a power. How do I share it? it? What autonomy and accountability I give to my teams so they can actually contribute to the strategy, to the change, and so on. So many interesting things. When you hear those things, Jenny, I want to start with you. And when you hear those principles, how do they resonate with you? And more, I'm especially interested how, you know, the First Nations principles and values guide you as a leader. Are there similarities, do you see? Is there some unique ways that the First Nation leadership brings forward? Could you share with us these things, please? The microphone decided not to cooperate. Oh, now it's working.
Now it's working. Thank you. I couldn't get it off mute, and so sorry for that. So yes, when I talk about First Nations principles and values, first of all, I explain what First Nations within the Australian context means, and that's really to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples of this continent. It distinguishes all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through their association and connection to distinct tribal and language groups, and recognition of the unique identity of Torres Strait Islanders, which is a small island just off the coast of Australia. So when I talk about identity, I identify myself as a proud Wandyandian woman of the Yuin Nation. If I was overseas, I'd probably refer myself to an Australian Aboriginal, a Koori from New South Wales, which is a collective group. And then I also acknowledge traditional owners and custodians of Australia. It is my cultural protocol when I speak at any event that I do acknowledge elders from our past. I acknowledge those who are with us in the present and those who might come to us in the future. It is our elders and our ancestors. They hold the cultural and spiritual wisdom that connects us to land, sea, and waters. In terms of leadership, and as an Aboriginal woman in a leadership role, I am guided by my ancestors, and it's these ancestors who taught me my spiritual and cultural connection to country, to listen to dream time stories and of creation, and to respect our leaders, and to nurture our young, and to walk softly on this land. An elder that I visited recently in one of our communities was very strong and advising us to listen, and listen deeply, not to respond, but to hear. And I carry that message with me all the time. So when I recognise First Nations leadership, it's not just at the top. Our elders are our leaders. We pay respect to our elders. We also have community leaders who change the lives of people on a daily basis, and we have young leaders influencing intergenerational change. And First Nations here we still experience vast disparities in social, economic, and justice indicators as well. So First Nations leadership is that commitment and inspiration to bring about positive change. To me, it's change that disrupts vulnerability and supports First Nations people right to determine their own solutions and their own futures. And it must include the voice of First Nations peoples. This often requires different type of leadership as well. You know, we talk about political persuasions, activism, community leaders, or my own, which is to lead, as I said earlier, with humility and act as a change maker and bringing people along the journey, and looking up to look out to understanding the impact of leadership as well. So in terms of First Nations principles and values, I mentioned earlier, First Nations are storytellers. through narrative of Dreamtime stories and through art as well. Often you might hear, if you're reading books about Australia or Australian Aborigines, it's not just about having a kangaroo in our backyard. So you might hear of rock paintings or carvings in rock that tell the story of a particular place and a moment in time. Gender equity and First Nations leadership is very important. Although when I do say that, First Nations women in leadership are really underrepresented in our corporates and, and often in our government agencies as well. First Nations leadership is through, it's through collective, it's through shared decision making. We often refer to it as yarning circles, sitting down, really working through problems and solutions or challenges, and storytelling through narrative. A profound interest of mine is to explore, I'm just going to add this, so a profound interest of mine is to explore what First Nations leadership within the humanitarian movement could actually look like. And, I'd be keen or interested on anyone's perspective on that as well. And if I explore that a little bit more, if I think about climate change, and I'm not an expert on climate change, but to embed First Nations knowledge, influence and perspective, our First Nations people have cared for this country for over 60,000 years, managing land, waterways and oceans as well. But how do we embed First Nations knowledge into Western science? It's an emerging piece of work here in Australia. And then how do we embrace some inherent knowledge systems? Traditionally, my people knew when the seasons were coming, and we used traditional fire practices. And I listened to an elder speak this week around we only took from the land what we needed to take from the land. So, it's an interesting and emerging piece of work on climate change, but how do we embed First Nations knowledge and perspective into a Western science?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was really so insightful and so beautiful. And when I was listening to you, really, we could just run a separate session just on exactly as you say this points. Where do we meet the First Nations and the humanitarian work? This would be so interesting to go in depth in that. So pity we don't have so much time today, but still thank you so much for this. Christina, I'm moving to you, and I'm now bringing us back to our network and to our organization. You have been more than 20 years in the network. You definitely have witnessed the changes, the adaptations. Sometimes we did better, sometimes we didn't do so well. As we look forward, what were for you the key learnings, and what could be those kind of key considerations for leadership that we should, really focus on and bring with us as we go forward?
Thank you, 𝗞𝗿𝗀𝗃, and thank you, Jennifer, for your very insightful story, so to say, because it's something I think this is one of the changes I've seen. We, for example, talk about the First Nation, which hasn't been very common, as you very well know. And this is one of the big changes I would see as a leader of One National Society, that as the leaders of the Red Cross, Red Crescent societies, we more and more consider ourselves as a global leaders of the global movement. So it's we are part of our own national society, but as being the national society leaders, our view and perspective is global, and this is a big shift. And when I listen to my colleagues in this debate as well, I see, for example, this global South, global North discussion coming up. So how we really look at the big changes in the global architecture in that sense. It's not only some kind of a conceptual or theoretical issue, but also it hasn't done it yet, but it will change our way our working, our way of looking at how we create partners and how we really use the momentum. And I think it's a process of understanding, but it's not in implementation. There is no very visible changes in our way of cooperate, but it will be reflected. The second issue, if I may, when it comes to the Red Cross, Red Crescent, my experience is that, and this has many sides, but we are much more professional. We look at ourselves as professional leaders, and everything what has already said now here about the listening to people, seeing people, being, as Grace was very nicely saying, that it's more like using your ears instead of using your mouth. And this is something what I see and we see globally happening all over in the professional leaderships, how we really use our capacity to enabling and encouraging other people to sign. It's not about us, it's not top down, but it's more like our role is to enable other people to be good in whatever they are doing. And this is definitely a big change. In relation to professional leadership, I think, and this is something we don't have time now to elaborate this, but this is about the democracy and participation in the Red Cross and within the national societies. I see this governance management issue becoming more professional. More professional, we look at what is the role of the governance, what is the role of the management, and there I see huge improvement, big changes in many ways. At the same time, and this is, I think these are the extremely positive signs, and of course it's in the process, and we have to look at it. At the same time, I feel like we are sometimes so slow in our thinking. When I look at the movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, it's like we have taken observatory position, like something is happening, not seeing that's happening within our own movement and societies as well. And how to act and react as a leaders, this is something we need to learn from others. And I think Jennifer brings very good and valuable information how it is dealt in the movements like a First Nation movement. It is done. I cannot, and this is my last point, I give others space to talk, but one thing with I'm happy and still concerned is this diversity inclusion. This is a long story. I mean, I'm very happy to be part of this Red Glow. We have had Red Vivo. We have regionally different kind of women's and gender groups to looking at the changes, and definitely there has been during the last 5-6 years a big changes, I must say. But still, I have a feeling we don't take it seriously. Both Jennifer and Grace started their reflections talking about this listening and learning. And I think we would and we will be much better in leading when we take seriously the diversity, we take seriously the gender issue, we take more seriously inclusion. So it's not only the justice issue, human rights issue, but it's also our way of doing better, being more relevant humanitarian actors. These are some kind of fast reflections I have had, and now looking as a retired person, what happens in the moment. But these are my first reactions. Thank you, 𝗀𝗀𝗃.
Thank you, Kristiina. So interesting. So much already depth in both of these speakers. Incredible, incredible. Grace, when you hear these things, I want to ask you as a young leader, what are your expectations as a young person from contemporary leaders? Maybe you can add something to the things that were said already, or maybe something that you really see different. So what are your expectations?
Thank you so much, 𝗀𝗀𝗃, for that question. And really nice reflections from my fellow speakers. And just hearing them talk, or what I can think of is how the fact that change is something that's normally constant in the humanitarian sector, wherever, change is constant. It keeps happening. I mean, we had COVID. Did anyone expect to have COVID? No. And we still keep seeing this kind of humanitarian challenges that keep cropping up each and every day. So then change invades our present, but then proper leadership is how we invade the future. Proper leadership is how we pave path for how we want our future to look like. And having that contemporary leaders are dynamic, are authentic, the expectation is for them to have strategic foresight, being able to identify what is to come. And I mean, analyzing the data that we have already collected, what we have already seen, what we have seen in the past, what we are experiencing right now, in the humanitarian sector, in the leadership sector, and then putting minds together and seeing what we can create, what we can come up with, what are the innovative things that we can do so that in the future we are resilient enough to fight whatever battles that are coming across our way. And secondly, another expectation is having a collaborative mindset. I think in this day and age, as young people and having conversations with people from the other generations, it's something that's absolutely important, because these are two minds that are coming together, two perspectives that are coming together to come up with solutions. And I think having intergenerational conversations, having collaborative leaders embrace intergenerational conversation is important. And not just intergenerational conversation. I mentioned seeing people, listening to people, understanding people, going to communities and actually getting their perspectives. And I've seen that work so well, involving the community in our solutions, involving the community in our leadership strategies, because it makes them feel like we are stepping into their shoes. And so we are getting to understand where the problem is. So another thing is innovation. I mean, innovation is, I believe in this day and age, innovation is everything. How we change, we analyze the systems, we look at what's working, what's not working, and then decide to move forward, and then decide to use another strategy. Innovation in how we do leadership, innovation in how we engage all stakeholders, how we engage the women, how we engage the men, how we engage the young people. And I love what Solferino Academy has done to have young people be part of the change, having, giving them a platform to learn, to come up with their ideas and really just participate in creating change that we need to have. So yes, innovation, I believe that's an aspect that leaders of today should embrace, the strategies that they use, because that helps us invade the future. We want to invade the future before the future invades our present. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Grace, really, with all this energy and this big ambition. Thank you so much. So let's talk about strategies now. We a little bit talked what we would like to see more of, what is important to us. I would like now to dig and deep dive a little bit into the strategies. So Jennifer, you have been leading this work of inclusion and reconciliation, and trying to build policies correct in the Australian Red Cross for the organizational culture to change and be more inclusive and be more safe. I would like to ask you, so for a leader, how do I know that I have succeeded? What are the elements of that inclusive culture in the organization that already for me are the manifestations that, I actually did something well?
Oh, yes, thank you. And great question. So I'm going to focus a little bit about, how do you know you've succeeded? It's about, for me, and from a First Nations perspective, it's having First Nations at the table, being involved in those decisions that impact on their lives and themselves, and their communities as well. A little bit what Grace was saying, talk to the community, involve the community, do the collaboration as well. But to do that also, I need to feel like I'm culturally safe, and to know that that's successful. A culturally safe and inclusive environment is one where I feel I can show up and I'm safe in my own identity, and I feel that I belong as well. So when I talk about cultural safety as well, it's more than just walking into the building and it's, a nice piece of art, or we have our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags. To me, it's cultural safety is around fostering an environment where First Nations people do have the opportunity to thrive. And doing that is privileging and honouring the voices of First Nations people to be heard and to be included, and having more First Nations people employed in leadership roles. But also there's some cultural learning and some cultural growing that's needed with that, to kind of, you know, put yourself in somebody else's shoes and walk in their shoes as well. So in Australian Red Cross, with our First Nations people and communities, we work at the speed of trust. And we don't impose ourselves in our communities. We wait till our communities invite us in as well. But, you know, and recognising that also, our First Nations, when we're employed, you know, when we take on leadership roles, particularly First Nations women, we carry a lot of cultural load, is what we call, because that's when, you know, you're called upon for everything for First Nations as well, but also understanding we have our community obligations and our people obligations as well. But, you know, we also need to be protected from racism, discrimination and harm. So, you know, really recognising that cultural load is really important. But it's also having the right systems, the processes and structures that are culturally responsive and respectful. And I keep saying to the needs of First Nations, because, you know, that's my passion, that's my commitment, as well as, you know, ensuring the inclusion of First Nations in the humanitarian movement as well. But like I said, you know, to me, it's about having First Nations involved at the table, being involved in decisions that impact them.
Yes, thank you so much. I think it really resonates with me as this taking a very holistic approach to really tackling so many different areas, so many different levels, and slowly building this picture in. Thank you, Kristiina. Turning to you and also having this question around strategy. You have seen strategies fail, I'm sure you have seen strategies succeed. And we now, as the IFRC network, will embark on the Strategy 2030 midterm review, because we are in the middle of the strategy. For you, from your experience, what are the important questions we have to be asking ourselves as we go through these strategic questions, as we are seeing the world around us change? What we should have in mind?
Thank you, 𝗞𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. First of all, I think it's really necessary to have a midterm evaluation of the Strategy 2030. I was happy to be part of the midterm evaluation of 2010, a couple of decades ago, and it was a finding at the time to realize that most of our national societies ourselves did not see it as our strategy. It was seen as the IFRC strategy. Now what I see, and this is really relevant, I think, most of the 191 national societies at least are looking at the Strategy 2030 and putting their own strategy in the frame of Strategy 2030. And I'm happy about this discussion in general, because I think it already has empowered me, but particularly because you forced me to read the Strategy 2030 again, and I realized I haven't went back to the analysis. And there are one thing, and one I think the big issue is that the goals are I think they're good ones, but even it's a relatively new strategy for the big movement as a federation is. Already now we see huge, profound changes in the environment we are working. We could not foresee the situation where we are at the moment, not in the global south, not in the global north. And from that perspective, when the New York Times is writing, never after the Second World War, the atomic war has been so close as it is as it is today. So I think when we have the midterm evaluation, I think we should look at ourselves in a serious way. And first of all, the question is that can we be? What is the focus? Are we really focused as a humanitarian actor? I think most of us can agree that the relevance of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement has increased during the last years. But at the same time, my midterm review question would be, are we doing the right thing? Are we focusing on the right thing? And are we collectively, not on the Kenyan Red Cross, Australian Red Cross, or Lithuanian Red Cross as an individual national societies, but are we collectively putting our resources on the right place? And are we using our collective resources in the right way? This is one thing I think whoever is doing it has to keep in mind. The second is, and it goes back when I started, that most of the national societies look at the strategy 2030 as they frame for their own national strategy. And my question would be, and maybe it's going to wrong direction, but anyway, it's my question. So I'm free to say it's more like what has to be changed in order to get the localization come true. And it's not about when I look at Grace, like is it global south? It's about the movement. Are we really taking it as seriously as we say we are doing? I say it because if we take localization as I read it, then it means changes in our working modalities. It means changes how we look at the partnerships. It makes changes at the global level, changes what we have described at the individual level, listening to each other, relying on each other. And I think Jennifer raised an issue which is really, really important, how we build the trust in order to be effective, efficient Red Cross Red Crescent movement. And the last element is, and it's about are we doing the right thing, and are we really focused? Look at how we read our values and fundamental principles, how we fulfill, implement the promises we have given to people we have promised to assist. So they're very, very fundamental issues. But and this is not to criticize the strategy 2030, but it is more like putting the Red Cross Red Crescent national societies in the midst of the humanitarian the world. These are the issues at the moment in a short discussion to look at.
Kristiina, very interesting and very useful, definitely for the whole process, I'm sure. Grace, I'm turning to you now. I have also this question around strategy. And my question to you is, so we have this IFRC as an organization, as a network that is fantastic, but also sometimes it's slow and sometimes it is rigid, also as Kristiina mentioned. But we definitely have this willingness and we want to incorporate the energy of innovators, the energy of, future thinkers. How do you think these two cultures can meet? What could be the strategy for us to actually, kind of collaborate better? Also, as you mentioned, that we need to collaborate. What are the ways?
Thank you so much for that question. And I think the fact that there is willingness to embrace, willingness to bring in this innovative people, fast-moving young minds, I think that's a really good first step. The willingness is always the most important thing. Are you willing to bring more people to the table? And there's something that Jennifer talked about, trust. Are you willing to establish trust between yourselves and the people that you're trying to bring in? Are you willing to actually listen to them, to hear them? And I think I've repeated this so many times, seeing people, hearing them, understanding them, listening to them. Because I believe at the core of everything is seeing, hearing, understanding, listening and understanding. So I think the willingness to do that fast is extremely important, because then if you're bringing young people to the table, you're bringing innovative people to the table, they need to feel like they are important enough to sit in the table. And that is only established through trust. I do understand that sometimes the rigidity of big organizations is probably caused by business or how things have been set up. But willingness to even establish a liaison to work with this innovative mind, somebody that acts like a middleman, so that in as much as the organization is busy dealing with this and that, there is a setup office, setup person that is able to also communicate and bring both parties to the table. At the end of the day, for us to move forward, for us to address these humanitarian challenges in a more effective way, all stakeholders need to be at the table. The fast-moving young people, the innovative minds, the brilliant leaders that have served in the organization for 20 plus years, all of them need to be at the table. So being able to establish that kind of trust and doing whatever it is, including having somebody at the middle to bring both of them at the table to have this conversation, I believe is so, so important. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Grace, for that. I just want to mention to our participants that we are really happy to hear your reflections and your insights and your comments. So please use our chat, share with us what things come to your mind as you hear the speakers sharing their experiences. Really, it's very also valuable and interesting from us to hear what do you think about these important topics and important questions. So as we move forward, we have a little bit more than 10 minutes left before our end of this conversation. I also didn't mention in the beginning, but we will finish the conversation at 2 p.m. CET, and then everyone who wants can join the breakout rooms where we'll have networking and conversations with each other. So there is an option as well for that. But for this last 10 minutes, I really would like to go back to these questions of leadership. I want to kind of a bit raise the urgency with this last question, because we see the world around us. We see what is happening around us, and it's not so many great things, I have to say. There is so much at stake these days. Kristiina, as you mentioned, we are closer to the nuclear attack, as New York Times wrote, than we are since the Cold War. There's also the climate crisis. It will always be there. We'll just have to constantly deal with the consequences that we are not aware of, what and how big and how harsh they will be. There is also a possibility of, potential spreading of some conflicts in other areas. So it's so many things, and also polarization, and also decreased interest, something that you talked that is so important, mistrust, also misinformation. There are so many things happening in this world. Can we say that this actually requires a radical rethinking in leadership? We need a new vision for leadership. And this is my last question for all of you today. So what is the most important about this leadership? What are the elements that we should really be strengthening, nurturing, focusing on? And what are the elements that we already see today we should forget about? We should never do that anymore. We should just get rid of that. Talk a little bit about your vision for this radical new leadership. Jenny, let's start with you.
Thank you. Wonderful question as well. But I think Kristiina already touched on it previously, Kristiina, around leadership that is inclusive, and we look at diversity and embraces change as well. But to me, it's also somebody who's optimistic to lead the change, and also that comes with rigor as well to lead that change. So, what we've been doing all the time, acts for humanity, caring, sharing, for all kind as well. So to me, it's really, inclusive, being diverse, optimism to influence change, but have that with rigor. And, as Grace also mentioned, having everyone at the table as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Kristiina, what would you add to the list? We have another microphone not cooperating with us. Grace, do you want to jump in? And then we will come back to Kristiina.
Grace, please.
All right. I love that question. I think we have moved from leaders as managers and people that just oversee things to leaders as people that influence change. And that is more needed now more than ever. People that can be able to lead and influence change and cause radical change to people. And I think one of the things that we really need to look into what we want to see in terms of radical leaders is cross-sector collaboration with different sectors, understanding how different sectors can come.
I think we lost Grace. Let's hope Grace will come back. In the meantime, Kristiina, maybe then you can jump in with your reflection.
Thank you. I hope Grace can come back. It's quite interesting. I feel like I'm extremely old-fashioned when I see the radical changes in the new leadership is to lead. I mean, the leading is to, as Grace very extremely nicely articulated, is to lead the change. It's to listen. It's to make right questions and then decide. And this is something, and it means that you have to be able to analyze the data, to information, to be in contact with people who are doing this, but doing the work. But then it means that also there are situations where you have to make difficult decisions. You cannot avoid, you cannot step aside like, okay, it's too complicated, world is so complicated, unexpected changes, so we have to do it. And I think, as I said earlier, we have to go back to the values and fundamental principles and our missions and ask the leadership has to ask what is the right thing to do. And of course, it's to lead by example and show the integrity, which is coming in extremely important. But there are two other issues I'm interested in. It's like, and it goes back where I hope Grace is back. But what Grace is, I want to refer back to her when she says that you have to lead the change. It's also where the leadership puts it's her or his or they energy is to look at the future. How we make the future. It's not like what happens, but how we make as a leaders the future with others, how we analyze, how we read the environment we are working and the trends, and we make the future of not only the national societies of Red Cross, but our humanity. And in that sense, one of the learnings I have had, and I haven't been good in that, but I want to share it because I wasn't that, so somebody else can try it, is like, if we want to be relevant and big, then be big and relevant. So do big decisions, do relevant decisions, then you become a big and relevant. So you cannot hide in the corner and hope something happens. Do it, and then we might make mistakes, but it's better than doing nothing. I think these are the elements for, I don't know how radical it is, but this is something what I expect from the leadership.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. Grace, we are happy to have you back. You were stopped when you were talking about the priority of cross-sectoral cooperation. So please share with us your further thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, my internet is quite unstable. But yes, as I was saying, cross-sector collaboration, intergenerational collaboration, I think that's one of the most important things that leaders should be looking at this point, to be able to embrace different ideas from different sectors as well. And just as Kristiina has said, I love that she said that if you want to do something big, then just do it. Don't just look at it. Don't just look at the big thing that's happening and then not do it. I think boldness and courage for leaders in this kind of world, in this kind of, these kinds of systems, boldness and courage is critically important. Being able to make that step, move forward, and come up with a decision or come up with an idea that you need to an idea that needs to change the world. Something else that I think is critically important is value-driven leadership. As an organization, we already have our values that we believe in, things that drive us, things that are our compass, and sticking to our values and going back to ask ourselves whether what we're doing right now, is it really reflecting our values, or are we embracing systems that worked back then and worked for the values back then, but are not working for our values right now and what we want to achieve right now? So those are my sentiments.
Thank you so much, Grace, and thank you, everyone. This has been really fantastic, and I have been monitoring the conversation in the chat, and I think really what we hear a lot is also, okay, so this is what we want to see more of. Like we kind of agree that this is the good leadership we want to see more of. How do we hold ourselves accountable? What could be the mechanism for us to see more of this, what we talk about today, not an aspirations, but an actual behaviors and actual ways of leading in our network? Could you share a little bit your thinking about this accountability and integrity? So how do we make that happen? Kristiina, please.
What I think, this kind of, I mean, now we had only 1 hour, but in generally speaking, we have to go to the platforms and put our thinking, our doings on a public scrutiny. It's the only way to be accountable. So if I promise to, let me say, I promise to Grace now, like, let's keep in contact, and if you ever need support in your leadership, I do it. So then I'm accountable not only for her, but all of you, like, is she talking or is she walking? And I don't see any other ways, like reporting, be as transparent, as open, as public as you do, and as you can. And then not to be too sensitive if somebody says, Christina, come on, look at your promises and what you do. So then you can correct yourself. As an individual, this is the only way, and accept you are not perfect.
Yeah,
Really.
I mean, you almost are, so
No, it's close to, yes, exactly.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Grace, last minute, would you like to share something?
Yeah, I agree with Christina. I think having to put yourself out there to be questioned is extremely important. And having people ask you the questions that make you uncomfortable, they make you uncomfortable, yes, but that is what makes us move forward, because then it helps us identify what is going wrong, what is going right, maybe what we need to innovate, how we need to change our strategies and our systems. So I think within the leaders and the IFRC, all leaders, they need to be able to embrace the idea that it's okay to be questioned. It's okay to put yourself out there, even just within the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, within the people that are under the movement, to be questioned. Let them ask you what is going right and what is going wrong. That's absolutely important here.
Thank you so much. Jennifer, please.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with everything that's been said, and I think it's also about making yourself accountable, sitting back, reflecting, thinking about the decisions you've made, having hard conversations, and sometimes even making hard decisions. I reflect on a First Nations leader who've always said, if you're standing beside a young person, make sure you take a step back and allow the young person to take a step forward. And I think that's just such a brilliant quote to carry as well.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This is also a very nice quote, I think, to end our conversation. From the bottom of my heart, I thank all the speakers. I thank all the participants. I thank the Glow Red for making this event possible. And really, it was an honor to have this conversation with you. We will have this the recording of this conversation available on YouTube, and it will be available then in the languages of your preference. So please share it with your colleagues, with anyone else who you think might be interested. We at the Solferino Academy are interested really to continue bringing forward this topic and this conversation. So if this is also something that you are interested at, please reach out to us. Let's think together how we can make more of this leadership, how we can see more of this good leadership thriving in our network. And with that, I give now the floor to my colleague, Heather, who will share with us how do we do the breakout sessions with those who are staying with us for another half an hour. Thank you so much.
Maybe we can give a round of applause either virtually or